Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Kweisi, Mfume, and for the next hour, we're going to take a deep look at the subject of maintaining inner strength during this trying and difficult and unprecedented time. I hope and pray that all of you are somewhere safe. I hope and pray that your families are well and healthy. And tonight, as we gather here for the next hour, all of us have in our prayers those men, women, and even children who are hospitalized at this moment, dealing with the effects of this virus, and those families who have in fact lost loved ones and are dealing with the grief that we just can't come to grips with right now. And so it is a difficult and unusual time. The dialogue tonight is only meant to do one thing: to provide answers and to provide a discussion so that we all can not only hear but to understand differently those things that we have to do to maintain ourselves and to get through this very difficult time. I am very fortunate tonight to have three psychologists who are with me, who've agreed to come on and to share their thoughts. I will introduce each one of them, and afterwards they will have an opportunity to give a brief introduction to the subject matter, after which we will start our ongoing weekly discussion. Again, I want to thank you for being with us. This has less to do with politics and more to do with people tonight, and the people are indeed you. So joining us is Dr. Lee Richmond, a licensed psychologist in the state of Maryland and a professor emeriti at Loyola University of Maryland. She is a former professor of counseling and human development at Johns Hopkins University. Additionally, she has been a human resources consultant and leadership development trainer. And she's done that for international and national organizations, including the United States Postal Service. She is widely published in books, monographs, journals, and has won awards for her work. Dr. Richmond is known for blending her interest in the nexus between psychology and spirituality, and in corporate circles for bringing this interest into the career development field. She holds a PhD from the University of Maryland. I want to thank you, Dr. Richmond, for being with us. I will yield to you in just a second. Also joining us is Dr. Jacqueline DeVol Harvey, a licensed clinical psychologist with a bachelor's degree in psychology from Hofstra University in New York and a master's and doctoral degree from the Pennsylvania State University. Dr. DeVol Harvey, completed her clinical internship at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York. She was born and raised in St. Lucia in the West Indies until her family migrated to New York. She ultimately moved to Maryland in 1998 to join the faculty at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, where she worked for 10 years until she became the Deputy Commissioner of Health in Baltimore. It's there where she provided insight and oversight of the bureaus of the School of Health and Management, Maternal Child Health Programs, the Office of Youth Violence Prevention, and the Chronic Disease Prevention Services. In 2014, she became the Interim Health Commissioner, serving in that capacity until the Ebola outbreak. And then in 2015, she became the Executive Director for the Mayor's Office of Human Services, remaining in that position until she joined the Prince George's Health Department as Deputy Health Officer. Thank you very, very much, Dr. DeVol Harvey, for you also joining us. And last but certainly not least, I want to welcome Dr. Tamara J. Brooks, a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Maryland who has 15 plus years of professional experience providing a range of mental health services. Dr. Brooks has been in private practice since 2006, providing individual therapy, psychological testing, and disability evaluation services. She is also a crisis consultant for the emergency department at GBMC Healthcare and the Baltimore Medical Center. She's also a staff psychologist at Morgan University's Counseling Center, where she previously served as the training director for several years. Dr. Brooks' expert advice in matters relating to mental health has been sought out by a number of media outlets, and she's serving as a guest, as some of you know, on some of those outlets to provide information and direction on these issues. She's also spoken at national conferences and a lot more, like they all have. We're very, very satisfied and overwhelmed to some extent to be able to get all of you at the same place at the same time. I know you've all got busy schedules dealing with this crisis and the mental health needs and psychological needs of people throughout Maryland. So again, thank you very, very much. What I'd like to do now is to yield to Dr. Richmond for a couple of minutes so that she might say something on the subject, and then we will go to Dr. Duvall Harvey and then to Dr. Brooks, and then we'll open things up. Dr. Richmond, go right ahead.
I thought that what I might do that might be useful is talk a little bit about what I'm doing right now. You gave a wonderful introduction, and right now I am doing some teaching. I consider myself a teacher. I'm a psychologist, but I've taught for a long time. And I'm doing some teaching at one of the local synagogues online. And I'm really interested in helping families and helping families help children. The other thing I'm going to say is I think the most important thing that people can learn right now is to stay in the present and not to jump ahead of themselves, not to jump ahead with what they see on the news and worry. So I'm trying to teach the ABC theory, and I can talk a little bit about this later on, but it's a theory by Albert Ellis that tries to help people stay rational in times of crisis. I think that's probably enough for me to say right now.
Okay, thank you very much again. Dr. Duvall Harvey.
Thank you for the opportunity. Actually, I took some time this morning to take a look at some current articles, and I found one that was actually just done this week in terms of a survey, and it said that the population is reporting at least 45 to 65% of feeling that their mental health is being challenged. So to the audience, I would say, if you're feeling scared, if you're feeling anxious, even if you're feeling depressed and maybe even struggling with sleep through the night, or just feeling on edge, you are absolutely not alone.
Thank you very much. And we will turn now and yield to Dr. Brooks, and then following that, sort of get started on this very interesting and challenging subject. Dr. Brooks, please.
Sure, and thanks so much. I think the one thing that I'd like to highlight is, as a practitioner, as a psychologist, I am actually seeing people on a daily basis and talking to clients one-on-one about what they're feeling in response to what all of us are experiencing, and the fact that this is so surreal for many of us. I think the common denominator between these clients is, as you mentioned earlier, getting acclimated to a new normal and really trying to redefine what that normal is. I see people with a range of presenting problems. I've gone from completing a clinical rotation, several clinical rotations at Spring Grove Hospital, worked in inpatient settings, emergency rooms, as you mentioned, university counseling centers, and now of my private practice. And what I'm finding is that across the range of presenting problems, the most, I guess, the most consistent issue that people are presenting with is just anxiety. Anxiety and fear surrounding, what do I do in response to this particular stressor, and where's the end? You know, to what end are we going to experience these demands that are taxing our physical and mental health? And so I'd like to echo what Dr. Duvall Harvey mentioned, and that is that you are not alone, that even some of the practitioners and medical and mental health providers are struggling with some of those same questions. And so we're all in this together. And the purpose of this evening's discussion is to empower, inform, and support each other.
Thank you very much. Well said by all three of you. If you're just joining us, I'm Kweisi Mfume. We are having an hour-long discussion on maintaining inner strength during these very difficult and challenging times. Dr. Brooks, Dr. Duvall Harvey, Dr. Richmond, thank you all for being with us. You, ladies and gentlemen, should be able to see them on the screen. As I said before, they were kind enough to give up their time to have this discussion. One of the things that was suggested in the pre-discussion meeting was that all of us are going through this together, and that all of us are impacted differently. It doesn't matter our station in life. We're impacted differently depending on where we are and who we are and what we do and what we don't do. But the one commonality in all of this is our own mortality. And so let me begin with my own thoughts and concerns as it relates to me as an individual, as a citizen of this state, and as someone who is impacted like we all are. First of all, we've all said, I never thought I'd see this in my lifetime. And then we say, well, you know, this is something that I don't know when it's going to end. And then we wonder ourselves about our own mortality. I mean, what happens if it happens to us? And should I go here? Should I not go there? Should I touch this? Should I not touch that? And what's going to keep me from being a part of this daily list of persons who are becoming infected, and some of whom who ultimately die? And so when the president comes on national TV along with Tony Fauci, and they both are suggesting that there is, in all likelihood, a probability that we're going to experience somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 deaths, if not more, in this country, it does shake us at our core in terms of who we are and whether or not it's going to affect us. We think about our families, we think about our other loved ones, we think about our friends, and then we start thinking about people who we just barely know, but we know are there somewhere in our lives. But the most frightening thing is the unknown. So I feel that way, just like everybody else. And I believe in many respects that we cannot have this discussion at some point without talking about our own faith, our own belief, our own trust in God, and in those things that are seen that we know about, and those things that are unseen that we don't know about. And I think in doing that, I hope at least in doing that, by the end of this hour, we'll all feel closer to one another in the sense that we all hold dear our own mortality, and we have come now to be to grips with things and are forced to come to grips with other things that nobody in this country, or in this world for that matter, thought about a few months ago. So in addition to our mortality, I hope we talk about resources that are available, particularly here in the state of Maryland, about the new norms and how do families now become creative in terms of their structure, in terms of their discipline to get through this together as a family. I'd like and hope that we would talk about the realities of not being paid, as many people who are watching this broadcast are realizing that they won't have a paycheck this week, next week, or the week after that. And what does that mean? What does that trickle down to in terms of our ability to take care of ourselves? You know, there was a discussion in the pre-meeting about being alone and living alone, and whether or not alone means something other than what we think it is. And is there a real fact to the matter that being alone is not being lonely, and that being alone, if it's positive, can lead to solitude, which will lead to other things that get us back to what we believe in terms of life, death, our mortality again, and solutions. So I'm going to just ask, because this is an open roundtable, that any of you or all of you jump in as we have this discussion. And I wanted to set the table in terms of those things that I think are important to discuss, recognizing that I'm sure all of you in your own work and your profession will add to that discussion in a way that I cannot. So please, let me just go ahead and do a draft and get Dr. Brooks to get us started here, and then ask the rest of you if you would join in as you see fit, without any hesitation whatsoever.
Well, I think you raised a good point in that many people for the first time are spending time really reflecting on their own mortality, and relatively healthy people who wouldn't otherwise be concerned about a question like that. But I think that now that we're feeling a little less insulated and a little more vulnerable, it does raise those moments of reflection when you begin to wonder, well, if something happens to me, are my affairs in order? You know, what will happen to my kids? Do I need to have these discussions with them, or is it still too premature to consider these things? And so I think that many of us, even those who have been fortunate enough to be in good health, are taking a minute to really revisit these questions in a meaningful way. And I don't think it has to all be fear-based. I think some of these moments of reflection can lead to meaningful, you know, dialogues with our family about prioritizing the things that matter to us. Some of my clients have shared with me that they've spent more time with their family members than they have in the past year or so. I have some people who are now making time to actually have dinner together because they are in the home together and they want to optimize on that time with their family members, you know, particularly their children. And then there's a time when you want to think about your own self-care. I think all of us have been so busy and inundated with a life that sometimes is void of meaning. Sometimes you feel like you're in a rat race. And so this has given us an opportunity to give ourselves permission to be still and to focus on self-care in a way that we really perhaps haven't in the past, looking at our breathing, looking at our weight, looking at our mental health, looking at whether or not we've been compliant with annual physicals and exams with our primary care providers. And so while there is the question of, should I in some way have my own health compromised and have to begin to look at my own mortality, this can lead to more meaningful reflection about how we want to live our lives moving forward.
So if I could add to that, I think what is also happening is for some people, staying home, perhaps again, the concept of being lonely, means that they don't have the support systems that they may typically have. And one of those really significant support systems is faith and being able to go to a house of worship and recognize that there have been many things we've experienced as a people. And this too shall pass. This will not go on forever. And issues of mortality are things that, again, we have to embrace and understand and think about how we live this in this world and what we do with our relationships with other people, whether we are good neighbors and all of those things. And I think faith has typically given all of us who believe in those things a sense of strength, an ability to persevere despite difficulties, and to hold on until it gets better. I think the folks that I am most worried about are the people who are not getting any income at this point. All of us need to have a steady supply of money for all of our bills. And for some, they may be eventually in a situation of homelessness. They may have to make decisions about getting medicine versus food, all of the things that we don't want people to have to choose between. And so if support is not provided, if care is not provided soon enough, and if people aren't returned to some stability, particularly around financial situations, things can feel even more overwhelming and more difficult and much harder to come back from.
I agree with everything that's been said, but I do want to say add a few other comments. Getting back to the questions that you raised in the beginning, Mr. Mfume, I think that these are all questions about our existence. And they're questions that face us anyhow. They face us all the time anyhow. We just avoid looking at them. It's easy to avoid looking at them when you're busy, but they're really there. They're not new questions. The second thing that I wanted to add to that is that, and I think it fits with it, I was fortunate enough earlier in my life to do a workshop with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And for those of you who are listening, you may not know her. She's known as the death and dying lady. And some of you may know that she wrote the stages of dying, which we now know are not stages, but they occur throughout life. We try to deny things and we go through various things before we finally accept our fate. But what Kubler-Ross said, and I'm going to say this rather slowly because I think it's important, if we could only face our own mortality, we would live every single moment as if living and loving were the exact same thing. That's a quote from Kubler-Ross. That's not me. And I think today with what's going on, you people that I don't see you in the audience, but I think you see an awful lot of loving amidst the fear that you are experiencing, anxiety. Even this show, even this program tonight shows loving. So let's face our mortality as though living and loving were the same thing. The second thing I want to say was about the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness can lead to depression. It can. And depression is also normal. I think you normalized anxiety. Depression is also somewhat normal today. But solitude can lead to faith. And if we can use our solitude to lead to faith in ourselves and others, in our country, in our world, the world might be a better place. I'll stop right there.
Well, thank you very much. It's an interesting place to stop at, because if we all did live as if our mortality was right here with us every day, we would, in fact, I think differently, act differently, and live differently. And so this pandemic has become a great big comma, if you will, in our lives, where we've got to stop and we've got to pause and we've got to reflect. Some of the harsh realities are the fact that people are dying every day, and eventually it will be people or a person that we know. Another harsh reality is that, as was said earlier, a lot of people are facing a great deal of anxiety because they don't have the same stream of income and are put in a position where just a month ago they thought they wouldn't be. And psychologically, I hope we can talk about what that does to the human psyche and what does that do to the individual who has to be the breadwinner, provide the money, and then the money is no longer there. And then maybe we can also talk about whether or not in something, and I'll use the word as bad as this, there is something good that can come out of it and is coming out of it, that we ought not lose sight of, because I assume that's the case. So please jump in. I just wanted to mention those things and see if any of you have any thoughts on that at all.
Sure. Well, one thing I want to highlight is that we still have some agency here, and we can begin to focus on the things that we can control. And one thing that we have as a great resource is our perspective, and really looking at what's going on in your own home, what's going on in your own family, and how can you begin to construct a day, construct a week that you still feel like you have some power and agency and continuity and routine, because these are all the things that sort of reset our sense of normalcy. And so I think it's important for us to realize that we've been through difficult times before. Many of us have lost loved ones before. Many of us have been through and thrived through experiences that we never imagined ourselves living through. And I think that we have to highlight those areas within ourselves that are very strength-based, and our perspective is one of those things. Our faith is one of those things. Our ability to problem solve is one of those things. Our resiliency is one of those things. And so we all have these resources within ourselves that we can access during these trying times. And in doing so, feel more empowered than we did, of course, when we first started out on this uncharted territory.
I found that I had a great deal of trouble knowing what day of the week it was since I've been home, because the only time I'm home is on the weekend. So for a long time, I always thought it was either Saturday or Sunday, when it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so this brings us into a situation where what we understand as typical in our day is very different. And I know for families, particularly if you have school-age children, you're not used to being home unless you are homeschooling or have the opportunity to remain home. But for the most part, our children go to school someplace outside of our homes. And they're not doing that anymore. And if you have children of different ages, it becomes even more challenging to keep up with the homework or the education documents that are coming of all of those different ranges. So part of what has to happen now, and it's probably happened for most of us by now, is we have to create a whole different structure of being home that is not the standard structure that we've had. We have to do the lessons, we have to do the meals, we have to organize ourselves in lots of different ways. But to Dr. Brooks's point and everyone else's, I've enjoyed being home. I've enjoyed having my family. I've enjoyed having my sons around. And ideally, if my life ever changed and I was significantly wealthy, I would love to remain home and just work from home. But that's not a luxury I have. But it is still very challenging to readjust and to realign. And then for families, again, it's really hard to find that quiet time, that private space where you're not interrupted, to say, okay, let me get myself centered. Let me focus on what's been happening. Let me think through the positives that this has brought. Let me find my strengths in dealing with all of those things. It can be challenging, but it doesn't have to be a fancy sauna. It doesn't have to be a special place. It just has to be a little bit private, so even if you go into the bathroom and close the door, those moments can be very helpful. I think my husband has taken that to the extreme, and I'm constantly knocking on the door because he's also reading in there. But again, boundaries and giving each other space and taking turns is something that we have to practice in a very different way, given this concentration of time together that we're all not really used to.
I, again, find myself in agreement with everybody. Speaking third, I want to bring in a different viewpoint, a little bit different viewpoint again. And that is that there is a difference, a real difference in our society now. And perhaps this is something you might want to address, Mr. Mfume, between the haves and the have-nots. Because people who have computers can find loads of activities on computers for their children to do. People who have income can ride out these months. It is very, very difficult. I was listening a little earlier to the president's broadcast, and the money is being sent to the bank for people who have jobs. But for the people who don't have jobs, it'll take them 3 weeks to get their paychecks, if then. So there's a real difference between the haves and have-nots today. And I think we ought to address that a little bit, but I want to say something about have-nots. And that is that what I hope psychologically is that people who don't have, people who are waiting a long time for their income and have all those problems I talked about, don't associate it with their worth. Your work isn't your worth. You are your worth as a human being. So though you don't have worth, you're worth something. Though you don't have money, you're worth something as an individual, whether you're rich or poor, white or black, you have value. And to think that I have no money, I have nothing now, is negative thinking. And what we want to do is get rid of that. And if I could say anything to people from a position of somebody that has to a position of all who don't have that are listening here, we have the exact same worth as human beings. Done.
Well, thank you again. And this matter of the have and have-nots has been with us historically. I think it's more emphasized now in the society that we live in because of the vast accumulation of wealth by a small percentage of people in our country and the lack of communication or the lack of accumulation by many others, almost 90% of the other members of the population. And there is a divide when you have money. We could start with the digital divide. You mentioned people having the ability to have computers and other devices that will allow them to get a chance to look at the outside world, to interact, to get news, to get entertainment, and to do a number of things, and those that don't. And this notion also about not having a job, but if you didn't have a job to begin with, I think it's doubly hurtful and harmful in terms of your ability to do very much because you can't even go outside. So what are you left to do? Borrow money? And if you can't borrow money, then what are you left to do? And that's why I wanted to, as psychologists, get all of you to kind of weigh in on whether or not what we are seeing over the course of the next few weeks exponentially leads to the things that we don't want to see, like suicide and attempted suicide and things like that. So Dr. Richmond, since you've been number 3 each time, why don't you start with that, and then we'll get the other 2 guests into the conversation. And tell me whether or not you have any thoughts, but more importantly, what do you say to people who are looking in and listening in right now about this whole issue of self-destruction, i.e. suicide, or the contemplation that I'm not worth anything, and now I know I'm not worth anything because not only do I not have anything, I can't do anything.
I would say, first of all, I would say I am so very, very sorry. Having said that, I would suggest that the people who are saying I have no worth because I have no job, I have no money, I cannot support my family, you may have more than some of the others that are even more than you know, just by seeing yourself as a worthy human being. And that will take a switch in thought What we're trying to do, I think, or what I'm trying to do as a psychologist, is try to get people to change their negative thinking into more reasonable thinking. Because the truth is that you do have worth. The truth is that your family probably does love you. Somewhere on earth, there are people who love you. And so instead of catastrophizing, instead of saying, I'm nowhere, I'm nobody, if you could just change that belief just a bit, because we believe what we see. And I guess the only thing I'm going to say, and let the other psychologists pick up on this, is see yourself as a person of worth, whatever else you may be stripped of. And I will stop at that point. If you see yourself as a person of worth, you will not commit suicide. It's a hard thing to do, but it's changing thought from negative to positive. I guess I do want to say one more thing. People who are poor have faith. People who are poor have a lot to offer. People who are poor have children that may grow up to be president. You never know. Think positively.
One thing I want to point out, doing crisis evaluations with people who are actively suicidal, having suicidal ideation, perhaps presenting with suicidal gestures, one thing that I notice is that how you feel today could be very different than how you feel tomorrow. And that oftentimes these thoughts are fleeting. And as Dr. Duval Harvey mentioned, this too shall pass. And just because you have the thought doesn't mean you have to act on it. It's just a thought. One thing that we encourage people and teach people how to do is to put some space and time between the thought and how you can choose to respond to it. And that choice, once again, is empowering because, again, it gives you agency. But I guess I would impress upon an individual who may be contemplating such a thought, which I certainly hope there's no one out there who is listening to us now. I hope they're not struggling with that. But one thing I would say to you is that it's a fleeting thought oftentimes. And if you can just put some space and time in between acting on that thought and reacting to that thought, you'll find that you have an opportunity to change your perspective about a thing, and that you may be more willing to receive support from clinicians, from family members, from neighbors, or from whomever, because you're not as alone as you may feel in that moment.
So I'd like to weigh in that and talk a little bit about the young people, because we look at the research that's done in the public schools, and we see that a significant number of young people already have thought about suicide and have gone as far as having a plan about how they would do it. When a young person is thinking and feeling those things, that is very, very serious, because they can actually mistakenly hurt themselves sometimes. But that pain of actually going through a process of saying, this is what I would do, says to me that that young person needs help. That person needs to have someone they can share those feelings with, who can help them get past those feelings before they take any, do anything to actually put that plan into effect. If people are not familiar with places where they can go, I can say to you that if you call 410-433-5175, if you're in Baltimore City, that number will connect you to staff who will talk you through whatever the issue is, will help you identify someone who can work with you to get you past this stage in your life, because that is not what we want our young people thinking and feeling. And that's a very serious issue. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is because they are so bombarded with information and images and everyone who looks like they have everything you can possibly want in life, and them feeling lacking and therefore not deserving of being parts of groups. That is very serious. So again, if there's a need to get help from families, if you don't know where to get that resource, 410-433-5175 in Baltimore City. For young people, you can also text to 741-741. If you text MD to 741-741, immediately there will be someone responding to your text and giving you as much support as you could possibly need. Do not sit quietly and not share this information with someone in your life. If you're afraid of doing that, you're afraid of that response, text to MD 741-741. Someone will talk with you. They'll go through an understanding of why you're feeling that way, and they will give you solutions. And it will happen immediately that you put that text in. So the only thing I'm asking is that you pause, as Dr. Brooks said, pause for 1 second and reach out to that line and get the help that will help you understand that those thoughts, again, are just momentary. Your whole life is ahead of you, and whatever you're feeling right now, this minute, in that bad feeling, again, that's not your entire life. And so it is not what we want young people to be thinking and feeling. And again, if you don't want to share that with a text line, I know your family would want to know this. They care about you and love you. And so it's really important that if something is going on, you reach out and let someone know. You are not alone in this. You are not the only person who has ever had these thoughts, but we want you to live a full life, and we don't want you to stop your life. So reach out for help if you feel you need it.
And
And
let me
I'll
add,
add one thing to that. Would add one thing to that, and that is, if your family says, "Oh, you don't feel that way," you really don't feel that way, because they're saying that because they don't want you to feel that way. So what I would like to say to some of the adults that are listening is take the time to listen to what your child says. The other thing I want to relate to is what Dr. Brooks said, and it has to do with time. Always take the time to think about what you're saying and think about what you are doing. I think that's a really important thing. Pause between the negative thought of a negative action. Pause for a while. It will make all the difference.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For those of you who may be just joining us, I'm Kweisi Mfume. I have 3 panelists of distinct psychologists who are with us tonight. We're talking about on the subject of maintaining inner strength during this pandemic. How do we find a way to get through it? What are our thoughts? What are our beliefs? What are our options? And what can we do in our own individual ways as we're all pretty much sequestered in our homes and in our communities? We've covered a number of different topics. We've got about 15 minutes left. I just want to make sure that we continue to exhaust the time as we have, providing what I hope are real answers, real solutions, and real thoughts about this pandemic and what we as individuals can do to get through it. Last month, I spoke at Dundalk High School. And I spoke before a group of 12th graders, 11th, 10th graders. The week before that, I spoke at Atholton High School in Howard County. And in both instances, I was just overwhelmed by the life and the energy that I always see in young people when I go to speak to them in high schools or middle schools. And in this case, both at Atholton in Howard County and both at Dundalk in Baltimore, I was besieged by kids who were happy, doing things great. And the single message that came from them is that we just want people to see us. We know that we've got to grow up. We know we've got disciplines. We know what our families tell us, but we don't want to be invisible. And so, Mr. Mfume, is there anything you can do to get people in your generation to look at us and to see us? And I thought that was interesting. So I wanted to use that as a lead-in to the next topic that I'd like for you to kind of touch on briefly if you can. A lot of households are households where teenagers live. And when we're all coming and going, there's sometimes we just don't have to deal with the things that we have to deal with now. So if you're in a household with a teenager or even with younger kids, tell me what has happened to that structure or what should happen to it. So again, that we see them and that we all get through this together. Any of you?
I think it's important to remember that although they're teenagers, they have their perspective on things as well. And I know that my daughters aren't teens anymore. I have a 20-year-old, well, I do have a 19-year-old. And they really help to keep me centered and present in the here and now and grounded on what I can focus on today. They'll always ask, why did you get so far out in front of things in your thinking? Why are you always trying to figure out the consequences of things that have yet to occur? And so sometimes we can take pause and take guidance from them about how to focus on those things that are right there in front of us, how to be present, and how to make the most of the time that we have with each other. I think this is a great opportunity, I mentioned during the pre-meeting, to have conversations yet had with our teens, but to be mindful to allow them to guide and lead those conversations. One thing I've noticed is that if you begin to drill them with too many questions at one time, they'll sort of go back into that shell because they feel like they're being interrogated. And so you have to just take a moment to hear them out, hear their perspective, and even get some feedback and advice from them on what they think the family should be doing right now to ensure that we're safe and that we're using our time wisely with each other. One thing I want to mention as well is that a lot of young adults, not necessarily teens, but young adults are back home from college. And while as parents, we'd like to think that they are as excited to see us as we are to see them, the reality for many of them is that they didn't want to go back home. And so you have some people, teenagers, young adults, where going home wasn't necessarily a positive thing. And it was something that was brought up in our pre-meeting that sometimes being back home means that you have to face family dynamics that being on a university's campus was a respite from. And so we just want to make sure those teens have resources that they can use to take care of themselves. Dr. Duval Harvey did well to mention that resource, that number is actually from the Baltimore Crisis Response Incorporated. The beautiful thing about that resource is that a teenager or a young adult can reach out to them as long as they're 18 years old or older. And they don't necessarily have to turn to the individuals in their home if they don't feel that that individual would be a healthy source of support for them, but they can still reach out and get the help that they need. Another great thing about that resource is that if you're a teenager who doesn't drive and it becomes medically necessary, a mental health provider can speak with you over the telephone if you call that number. And if necessary, they will actually come out to your home and do an emergency evaluation or provide you with resources. And so teenagers have agency as well. If you feel like you can't turn to the people in your home, there is information that we can share with you where you can reach out to others and receive that support.
The Harvard Medical School has put out 2 sites on the internet. One of them is how to talk to your teens, and the other is how to talk to your children. I can send those sites to, I don't know who to send them to after this. I can't look at them right now and do it, but I will send the sites to somebody. Maybe you can get them out to the
Yeah, if you send them to us, we'll get them out through the campaign office to anybody that'd like them.
Okay, I will. I'll send them directly to you. The other thing is the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has a section of their stuff on COVID-19 on how to talk to your children. And then I just wanted to say one thing. This is harder on teens, perhaps, than it is on a lot of other people, particularly young teens, because they're used to moving around in groups. They move in peer groups, they move in packs, and to stay at home is a really, really hard thing for them. So have compassion on their suffering and be gentle with your teenage kids. That's all I want to say to that.
And to remember, we were all that age at one point.
That's right, we sure were.
I was thinking that same thought, that even though the time was a different time and the electronic devices were absolutely fewer, we have to remember that for the first time, technology has actually separated families than bringing them together. You know, cars brought families together in driving. The one television in the house, when televisions came out, we all watched it together. But now our children are far more competent than us in terms of technology. They live and breathe it like nothing. And so my only opportunity to connect with my boys is to make it very clear that I know nothing about technology and I need them very much to assist me with everything I do. And I think it makes them feel good that, you know, their mom, who's of a certain age and has these degrees and all of those things, can't figure out how to get in on Facebook or do anything. And so it equalizes us a little bit, because I marvel at what they're doing on these computers. I do worry when the negative messages come in, but for the most part, the technology, I think, has helped them grow and has expanded their minds in ways that, we did not have. And every generation that follows will be more capable. But there will always be that need for us to shift from them being babies to individuals who make their own decisions, and we just have to stay home and worry about it, because that's what our parents did as well. But there are also, I want to make sure we know, there are young people who are alone. There are young people who unfortunately have been put out of the home by their family because of any particular behavior, any kind of gender identity, sexual orientation issue. So there are a lot of very lonely adolescents out there, and couch surfing, sometimes just staying on the street hiding. And those are some of the young people, I know are in far worse shape, because they are in the environment where, the virus is fairly prominent. And they have enough struggle just, getting a bed to sleep in at night, or a place to eat, a place where food is provided, and keep themselves safe. Because we know a lot of trafficking goes on among young, homeless young people as well. So that's a group that I think is struggling and not really being seen by many people, because they're able to keep it a secret by blending in on college campuses. And that's not a place now that's open to them. So we have young people who are suffering as well. And that's something that we need to be aware of and try to reach out whenever possible.
Okay, can we talk about domestic violence for just a bit? Because every report that I've seen indicates, particularly here in Maryland, and I assume it's the case elsewhere, right, that complaints of domestic violence are increasing as we go into this pandemic, and as we go into it further. And I don't know, since none of you are in law enforcement, you're not getting presented with this the same way that officers are and police departments are, but what are your own thoughts on this issue? Is it the fact that people now are kind of forced to be in the same space? And if so, how do you deal with that from a psychological perspective as psychologists? And what do you say to people who are in that situation and you can't say anything tonight because of the house that they're in? Or what do you say to those persons who might be on the brink of that before something explodes?
So let me just say that what domestic violence looks like now is very different than how it used to look. Previously, we had a sense of there would be evidence of injury, some person being hit and slapped, and just their body showing the damage. Now it's actually changed some, where somebody might send a text, and if that text is not responded to immediately, there's the suspicion that that person is doing something that that individual does not want them to do. And then they are punished, and they may not necessarily be punished physically, but they may be punished by being locked in the house. So there's a shift in what we had always looked at as signals of violence in terms of bodily injury, which is much more psychological now. And so it is a lot more pervasive because it's unseen. There used to be much less protection when a young person said that I am experiencing this, because people would look at the body and say, well, we don't see any signs on your body that somebody's hurting you. But the psychological injury is far more dangerous than some of the physical injury, except obviously if that individual is killed, which is then the ultimate. But it's all about manipulation and control. And it's taken us a long time to shift some of our regulations, but there is now protective order opportunities in the state of Maryland, where individuals can come forward and say, and present whatever is going on, and they can get an order of protection taken out. We can send that information to the audience I think that it would be good for the audience to have it and to keep it in a safe place. So that they can access those resources readily.
And let's take it to the extreme example. If you are in a domestic household and you are the person that's being abused, and the person who is abusing you really is the breadwinner or contributes a significant way to the income of the household, and let's say also there may be children there, does that create a hesitancy to want to get a protective order? Because then there's separation, and then there is the inability to do what you had been doing as a family, economically and otherwise. I'm just trying to suggest that there probably are people, because of the pandemic and because of the fact that we've all been sequestered in our homes, and because, you know, different people have different levels of temper and act out sooner, that there may be people in that situation now. And what do you say to that person who might be abused, as well as that person who might ultimately be the abuser?
If the abuse is the kind of abuse that was just talked about, that's psychological silent abuse, and that abuse can also be non-physical at all. It can be ignoring a person in the household so that a person is alone to deal with this crisis. I would certainly say talk to somebody, talk to the agencies, but talk to somebody. Communicate with other people than the abusers. Don't hold it inside of you. Let people know what's going on in your household and what's going on with you.
I think we have to also mention that abuse doesn't just take place among heterosexual couples, that there are same-sex couples who experience abuse as well. And as was mentioned, that it doesn't have to be restricted to just physical abuse, that sometimes it is psychological, verbal, and emotional abuse as well. There are a number of resources that are available to people who may find themselves, unfortunately, in that situation. One of those resources is the House of Ruth. There's My Sister's Place, there's Turnaround, there's Chase Brexton Health Services. And these are all resources that we can make available to the audience. But I think it's important to know that you can reach out to someone. I know that oftentimes reaching out to someone is a risk in and of itself. But the beauty of some of these resources is that they'll actually come to you if you're not able to get to them.
Thank you very much. We are really at the end of the 1 hour we allotted, so I'm going to ask if all of you will just grant me a small wish and tell me that you can stay on for a few minutes longer, because the conversation has been so flowing and so full of information that I don't want to just stop it right here. I'd like to go for just a couple more minutes, if we might. And does that mean yes, we can do this? Thank you all very much. And by the way, our guests are Dr. Tamara Brooks, Dr. Jacqueline Duvall Harvey, Dr. Lee Richmond. They are all psychologists. They are all here tonight to help this discussion about what do we do to maintain our inner strength while we go through this pandemic together, with all that it brings, both the death and the fear and the concerns and the anxiety, and how it's affecting all of us in different ways, particularly as it relates to our own mortality, and that we're looking at that differently now. We're looking at families and family structures differently. We're looking at alternatives, and we're looking also about to what extent that we can control what seems to be an uncontrollable situation. I would like, and I would be remiss if I did not go to the subject of faith and religion and all the other things that create for many of us the inner strength that we know that we need to get through this. And someone mentioned earlier that people oftentimes would rely on a house of worship, regardless of how we worship, but a house of worship to be able to find that connection and to have that inner strength. And so whether it was a church, a synagogue, a mosque, it all provided for those who were attending the ability to tap into something much more powerful than themselves to get through a number of things, but more importantly, just to be able to live. We're in a situation now where those houses of worship have been reduced to what we're doing tonight, talking over a internet and through a communicative means that sometimes separates the worshipers from the actual worship, sometimes. but it's certainly different than what has happened before. And I don't know to what extent viewership has gone up. My sense is that it has for many of the churches who are online, but and other houses of worship that are online. But let's just, if we can, talk about why the human element has often relied on that kind of spiritual connection. Not everybody, because there are a lot of atheists and agnostics, but why so many still rely on that. And what does it mean now when we are, as someone said earlier, assessing our own mortality and figuring out, do we need to speak to family members? Do we need to get our affairs in order if something were to happen to us? And where do we go from here? So if you would just jump in as you see fit. Let's talk about that for a few minutes before we wrap things up.
Well, I think that the houses of worship are doing a good thing, a great thing actually, by putting services and activities online. I read somewhere, and I don't remember where, about a rabbi. And this rabbi walked around in the woods at night and talked to God. Now, this may sound very strange, but this particular rabbi was not even sure he believed in God. But he believed in people. He believed in a God within. And so whether he was talking to himself or talking to some spirit out there, he was at least talking. That talking is in itself a prayer. Anybody can talk, and I'd like to suggest that agnostics and atheists are also spiritual people. So whether you're walking around in the woods at night or walking around in your bedroom or lying in your bed, I would suggest just jotting down your thoughts or saying them out loud. I think that's a spiritual activity. That's my view of it. I think that's good for you.
And I think if there was ever a time when you feel like things are beyond your reach and outside of the realm of your control, and really feeling as if you need to rely on something higher, deeper, wider, broader than yourself, now is it. And I think that every person has permission to go to whatever place that is inside of them, whether it's just a moment of silence, whether it's going back to your breath. And as I've continuously pushed doing diaphragmatic breathing, but going back to your breath and realizing that if you're still here, then your life still has purpose, and using this as an opportunity to find meaning in that purpose, even if it's just on a daily basis. And right now, and I think one of the things that we really have to focus on is just, again, staying present and being aware of what's right, what's good, what's decent, what's working, and that the human spirit, whether we're aware of it or not, is connected in a broad way, not just in this country, but now globally. And that perhaps this means that a shift is about to occur that wouldn't have otherwise occurred had we not been so tied to each other right now by this common experience.
So I want to take it maybe in a little different direction and talk about having a small child and having to explain to that small child what's going on. And it is extremely difficult to do that if you have not already had a conversation about the concept of death. My children had goldfish. And sometimes what happens is when the goldfish dies, parents go buy another one quickly while the child is sleeping so that they don't have to explain the concept of death. But we didn't do that. You know, when that goldfish died, we had to explain to our son that, you know, life ends. Life ends for all living things. And it's what you do with that life that's important. And unfortunately, the life of goldfish are very short because of, you know, just how they are made. I mean, you can just kind of, you know, create your story as long as you are explaining that there is an end in terms of the life that we live. And so that was understandable at that level. And it was easy because we could just go get another goldfish. So it was not a dramatic, painful explanation that left my children feeling sad and upset. They got the concept from that small fish. And so for parents, it may be, or family members, it may be important to have something like that where you talk about that concept so that children aren't afraid to go to sleep at night and worried that they might die or something else might happen that's horrible. because we will die. That is a reality. And it's really about what we do with the lives that we have and the time we have. And so making sure that we have those conversations in an age appropriate way, I think is important. And children's television has gotten amazingly competent at helping us with those life lessons. I know people know that there's the story of Mr. Rogers out now, but again, public television has some amazing learning shows for children where they can now they can actually sit in front of that television with the right channel and learn even more than they can learn outside sometimes, because it's focused on their age group and the quality of that education is extremely high. But the concept of death has to be discussed in families so that there is a foundation when it happens in the adults in that child's life, and that they have something that they can understand and not be afraid of it.
There is a joy that comes with spirituality, and I just want to share something I read recently. This is the season of Easter and Passover, and all of you know that on Passover, the 10 plagues are recited, and certainly this is a season of plague. But I just recently learned that the Hebrew letters in Hebrew that spell plague, if you reverse the same letters, they spell joy. In other words, at the end of plague may be joy. It's the same letters that spell them.
Wow.
Wow.
Yes.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Dr. Duvall Harvey, thanks for telling and using the story of the goldfish, which I think a lot of us, even in our later years, can relate to. It happened to me. I must have been 6 or 7 years of age, but I got it in a different way. I was told that my goldfish that I call Goldie had died because Goldie ate too much food.
Oh.
And I grew up in a household where we were very poor. I had 3 sisters. And so I thought my mother may have been saying, I had to say, don't eat all of the food, save some for some of your sisters. But it kept me from being greedy, let me just say that, at the table. But you're right, it's how we explain it to children that matters. And it's probably something that should be done sooner rather than later, because that's one of the hardest things for kids to come to grips with is death. And it's so hard to keep them away from television and radio reports that talk about the mass deaths that are occurring in our society without giving them some proper context to be able to deal with that as well. Let me ask all of you before we do wrap up, are there any techniques to deal with anxiety? Some people recommend certain breathing tips, others have other tips, but as 3 psychologists, what would you say to that?
Well, I always encourage people to, again, go back to their breath. One thing that I've really been working with clients on is diaphragmatic breathing. Very simple exercise. It seems so simple that it wouldn't be effective, but it really is. I think that we have to be mindful to mitigate some of the anxiety and stress that we're experiencing in our bodies. Right now, we're all hypervigilant and super focused because of this perceived threat, which of course is the coronavirus. And our reaction to it is very similar to our reaction to any perceived threat. We go into that fight or flight response. That sympathetic nervous system gets busy. And unfortunately, we're still in that fight or flight response every day as information becomes available, and we're finding ourselves having to make really difficult and unfamiliar decisions. And so we have to find a way to begin to take some of the charge off of that anxiety and stress, so that we don't compromise our immune systems. We want to help our bodies stay strong, fortified, and do what it needs to do to ward off any stressors to our bodies. And so one thing that I've encouraged people to do that they can access in a very practical way in real time is to engage in diaphragmatic breathing, which involves taking a nice deep breath through your nose, filling up your belly. So when you take that deep breath through your nose, your belly should expand. You want to hold on to that breath for 1 or 2 seconds, and then you want to slowly release it through your mouth. You can do 3 to 4 repetitions of that, and do that several times throughout the day. to get out in front of any increase in your anxiety so that your body becomes more resilient and more able to fight off or ward off a spike in anxiety or stress. And again, I want to just highlight the importance of doing that because it helps to decrease that stress in a way that has some really helpful and serious implications for keeping your immune system strong.
From a family perspective, I would suggest that we start by limiting how much of the news we actually watch. If you can select whoever your most trusted journalist is and only watch that individual at whatever time of the day you can, I think that's going to be enough. After a while, it's repetitive and it just becomes overwhelming to hear all the stories. So again, limit how much television you watch. I would suggest if it's a family, and again, if it's a mixed age group in the family, bring out the board games. At first, your adolescents will be, oh my goodness, no, we're not doing this, mom or dad. They will fuss as much as they want to. And you just have to be firm and say, we are going to do this for tonight. And if you don't want to do it again, we won't do it again. And they will find they enjoy it. You know, it'll give family time to communicate, to enjoy each other, to, you know, be a collective, have fun. We can still have fun in the context of all of this because it's important for us to have balance in our lives. So, you know, put away the phones, get us firm agreement that no one will have their cell phone for 1 hour, that we will just put it away and do something together as a family. You know, like I said, there will be resistance in the beginning. You are the head of the household. So you just ask for that hour, and then of course you have to bargain for something that they can get later. That's fine. But they will start to enjoy that time and actually want to extend it. It absolutely works. So I would suggest you try that.
Well, thank you. Go right ahead.
I would like to say something to very, very busy parents, and it's something that I read on one of these websites that I will send you. And that is to get your children. Parents are overwhelmed. They're doing kids' homework. Their kids are working from home and they're working from home. And it's really tough on a lot of people. So what the website recommends is get your children involved in chores. And the reason for that is that they will feel that they're doing something to help you. They are doing something valuable to help you. They're learning something. Let them help the family and praise them for it. And actually that in itself is a spiritual activity because it's a person helping another person and they can know that. The other thing that I neglected to say in the goldfish story is one of the reasons that's so wonderful is that the CDC recommends that you do talk to your children about what's going on, but talk to them at the appropriate age level. In other words, don't throw everything at them at once. And what you were saying is very appropriate, I think, to I'm calling you because you're shaking your head, but everybody relates to the goldfish story, you know. So when you talk to your kids about things, talk to them at the level where they are. One other thing, and then I'll be quiet for as long as you'd like, and that is be a little bit tolerant with the cell phones, because that's the way kids have learned to communicate with each other. Adults are chatting on Facebook and things like that now. The kids are way beyond that. They have all kinds of language that they talk to each other with on their cell phones. So instead of saying put it away sometime, understand the way they use it. I see. You want to say something about that? You're shaking your head so much. I don't know if
we all agree. We all agree.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, look, let me thank you all for being with us, for staying another additional 15 minutes or so, and for giving of your time. I'd be remiss if I did not thank Dr. Thelma T. Daly for helping us to arrange the subject matter and our guests. Dr. Daly, if you're listening, thank you very, very much. And I know I speak for all three of my panelists when I say that. Dr. Tamara Brooks, Dr. Jacqueline Duvall Harvey, and Dr. Lee Richmond, I can't thank you enough for adding to this discussion. We thought it was important to talk about how we go about maintaining our inner strength through this pandemic, through this crisis. We thought we would do it also not from a frivolous sort of perspective, but from people who are actually trained in dealing with psychological issues like this. And there are many that are coming out of this pandemic. And we are thankful that the three of you all said yes when asked to be here with us. I do want to say to people who are listening, if you have other subject matters that you think we ought to be focusing in on and can send them to us, we would really appreciate it. The website is mfumeforcongress.com, and the 4 is F-O-R. I'm a little old school. And to the extent that you want to give us a ring, you can do so at 410-357-1212. That's 410-357-1212. I'm Kweisi Mfume. We thought rather than to do anything that was political here, we wanted to do something that was practical and personal, and that was to bring you information from people who really understand and feel what's going on and what all of us are going on in a different way that goes so deep to their own training and understanding that they would have an opportunity to talk and to listen to me, at least, as we go through this discussion. I thought it's been a great discussion. I do, again, want to thank all of you. I want to thank everybody who took the time on Facebook Live to join us. We'll be back in a few days with another presentation, and we'd like to get your thoughts, and we'd like to get your suggestions. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. To my guests, thank you all. I do appreciate it. And to all of you who are viewing and watching right now, be safe, be healthy, and stay well. Thank you, and good night.